Subscribe and stay tuned for new upload.
Episode 241, Confrontation. Alex managed to dodge Cliff's attack, but he knew he needed to buy himself more time to gather his focus and make an attack using his internal force. "Hey, that was pretty good," he panted, trying to sound casual. "But I'd like you to hit me with your real strength. You keep giving me all these soft hits. I thought someone as skilled as you would have finished me by now. Quit playing around." As he said this, he focused on gathering his own strength. Cliff was shocked that Alex still had the nerve and the audacity to speak so arrogantly after being hit so many times. But he also heard the mockery in his voice and knew that everyone from the wedding still watching them had heard too. He couldn't let that kind of insult go unanswered. "You think that was me just playing around?" he growled. "I'll show you something fun." Just as Alex had hoped, his insults shook Cliff's focus. It didn't reduce his strength by much, but it was just enough to allow him to retaliate. He dove in and managed to land a blow near Cliff's neck. Cliff managed to elude him at the last second, letting the blow land on a slightly less damaging spot. But with that move, Cliff finally became scared. The blow was skillful and powerful. He knew that if it had landed on him at full strength, it could have killed him. But now that Alex was so close to him, he had an opportunity to defeat Alex. He twisted his fingers into a sharp shape like a beak and prepared to rap at the side of Alex's head. He knew the blow would throw Alex off, confusing him just long enough to let Cliff get in another strike. If he could just punch Alex in the face once more, he knew he could win. But when his first sharp little blow touched Alex's head, Cliff felt as if all the force and power in his strike was a drop of water falling into the ocean. The power of the move seemed to sink and disappear without a trace. The energy around Alex almost felt as if it was pulling at Cliff's strength, robbing him of his force. Cliff gasped and looked at Alex in horror. Alex smiled back at him. An internal force, Cliff thought. He recognized in an instant how Alex had managed to absorb his blow. But he didn't understand how such a young man could have such a strong internal power. The energy felt much older, more like the force gathered and accumulated over 50 years of training. Alex placed his hand over Cliff's. Fueled by his internal force, he pulled at Cliff's arm, straining the muscle and pulling the arm out of its socket. Cliff collapsed to the ground, howling in pain. Alex winced, but he knew this wasn't the time to be merciful. Cliff had attacked him with lethal intent. If he wanted to be sure this man would never try to overpower him again, Alex knew he needed to make his power clear. Alex swept one leg across Cliff's body hard enough to throw him across the room. Cliff threw through the air, knocking over several rows of chairs until he finally collided with the wall. He fell to the ground, gritting his teeth and groaning. His body felt stiff and heavy, as if he had already died and become a zombie. When he recovered a little, he raised his head and shot Alex a hateful, helpless glare. He opened his mouth to insult Alex one last time. But before he could force the words out, his strength finally gave out and he fainted. The crowd around them stood frozen in shock and fear. As soon as Cliff had begun his attack, they had all assumed that Alex was done for. No one had expected Alex to have the strength and skill to put up a good fight, let alone win. The sight of Cliff Munson, one of the best martial artists in the country, lying unconscious in a pile of furniture broken by the force of the final blow that knocked him out, would stay in their minds for a long, long time. A loud clap resounded through the room. It was Alex, slapping his hands together with a sense of finality. He hadn't come to the Drake family's villa to become a martial arts legend. He still needed to make sure the wedding didn't go ahead. He looked around and spotted Leona and began to walk toward her. Beside her, David Drake began to shake with fear. He wondered if Alex was going to demolish him the same way he had the martial arts expert. Cliff's job was fighting, and sometimes fighting meant losing. But David didn't think his reputation could withstand being beaten at his wedding by someone like Alex. As Alex approached, he tried to back away. But he and Leona were still surrounded by people, and they formed a tight half-circle behind them. When David stepped back too far, the old priest managing their wedding cried out in surprise as his foot was squashed. But David didn't care. He didn't care about anything except the sight of Alex walking toward him menacingly. His mind was blank. He knew this was a life-or-death situation. His breath began to come in quick, panicked gasps. Leona heard every sharp little intake of breath. She looked at David with concern. "Are you okay?" But it was as if David couldn't hear her. He couldn't tear his eyes away from Alex. He felt at that moment that if Alex told him to hand Leona over, he would do it without hesitation. But Alex heard Leona trying to check in with David. He was surprised at how genuinely concerned she sounded. A horrible thought occurred to him. He had only just found out that Leona was the one getting married today instead of Lindsay. He had assumed, or hoped, that Leona was being forced into the marriage. But what if she had come to the wedding today willingly? The idea made his blood surge hot with anger. He glared at David with renewed, jealous intensity. David cried out in fear when Alex glared at him. He felt his legs going soft. The room felt like it was spinning. It was like being drunk without any of the music or fun. Humiliatingly, he felt something warm and soft trickle down his leg, and knew that he had just wet himself. Suddenly, the sound of a police siren blared through the Drake family's villa. A chorus of voices shouted from the door, "Don't move!" A team of 5 or 6 people walked in slowly, each holding a rifle. Their sights were trained on Alex. When Alex had defeated Cliff, Reginald, David's father, had decided it was time to intervene. Hidden in the crowd, he had sent a message to the security captain back at his home, asking him to raise an alert and come to the villa to deal with the emergency. He was determined that this marriage go forward. This was the Drake family's path to getting established in Washington, D.C. Now, he stepped forward with a smile on his face. "Young man, you're quite the troublemaker. I think we deserve protection from someone like you." He cast a quick look at the crowd around him. "Does anyone object to me solving this situation?" No one there felt brave enough to argue with him. They were all still shocked and scared by the fight they had just witnessed. "No complaints," one person muttered. "Yeah, we need help," another person agreed. We're all too important to die here. No one's gonna miss that crazy kid anyway, I bet, the first person continued. Reginald gave Alex a winning smile. Well, you heard them. We'll come up with a story to explain what happened. An accident, maybe, or a misunderstanding. With a little cleanup, no one will know the difference. Not even those people from Brunei. But what'll they be able to do? He looked to his security team. Ready? But before he could order them to shoot Alex, a pink figure rushed forward, screaming, No! It was Lindsay. She threw herself at Alex, stretching her arms out to shield him. She glanced at Reginald desperately. Mr. Drake, please don't shoot him. Please let him go. Her father, Charles Marvel, gasped in horror. Lindsay, get away from him! But he didn't step forward to grab her himself. He wasn't sure what to do. Lindsay couldn't hear him or even see his concern. She was too frightened and worked up to notice anything except Alex, the guns, and Reginald. Mr. Drake, please don't shoot him, Lindsay repeated. Let him go. I promise he won't cause any more trouble. You know I can't do that, Reginald said coldly. Step away. You can't! You can't! Lindsay turned around and wrapped herself around Alex. She felt certain that as long as she shielded him, Alex would not come to harm. Episode 242, Surrender. Lindsay hugged Alex tightly. She hoped she could protect Alex from being killed by Reginald's security team. But even if her intervention wasn't successful, she thought she would at least be able to die in his arms, knowing she had done her best. But suddenly she felt a strong force pushing at her, trying to separate her from him. She opened her eyes and realized it was Alex trying to push her away. Lindsay felt deeply afraid. She knew that Reginald would order his security team to shoot as soon as she stepped away. She clung to Alex desperately. But then he looked down at her and glared. Get away from me. When we spoke on the phone before, you said you were the one marrying David today. But now it's Leona in a wedding dress? You lied to me. Alex was genuinely angry with Lindsay. If his cousin Nathan hadn't accidentally told him the truth, Leona and David would have gone through with the wedding before Alex could intervene. But even though he was angry, he was moved and impressed by Lindsay's courage. She had thrown herself directly into the line of fire to protect him. He recognized that she was trying to help him, but he didn't want her to get hurt. He knew he had to get her away from him, whatever it took. I'm sorry I lied, she cried out. Be mad at me later. Punish me later. But right now I'm trying to keep you alive. Get away, Alex roared. I don't want to hear anything else from you. He knew he needed to drive Lindsay away. He raised one hand and struck her hard across the face, throwing her to the ground. As she fell, Debbie's old jade pendant also clattered to the ground. Leona and Lindsay both knew it was meant to be kept hidden and out of sight. But Leona had wanted to have it there at her wedding, even if she couldn't wear it herself. Instead, she asked Lindsay to wear it that day. Alex's heart lifted when he saw it. He remembered the day Debbie had received it. When he looked up, he saw Leona glance at it nervously. "That's yours," he told her. "Do you remember it? It belongs to you." Leona walked over to kneel next to Lindsay. Her hand closed over the jade pendant, hiding it from sight, but she glared at Alex angrily. "My sister is trying to help you, and you treat her like this?" During this time, David had managed to pull himself together. Now that even Leona was talking back to Alex bravely, he stepped forward with a sneer. "Alex, you're done here. Dad, do it." Reginald lifted his chin. "Like my son said, you're finished." He glanced at his security team. "Prepare to fire." A chorus of gunshots rang out. People in the crowd ducked, covering their eyes and ears. They thought that the trouble must be finished now. There was no way Alex could have survived. But when they looked up, they all saw the members of the security team laying on the ground, clamping their hands over their wounds. Alex was still standing. A few people began to scream, more out of confusion than fear. They wondered what kind of horrible trick Alex had played now. But then a new group of people began to rush into the room. They were led by Ken Stokes and Sam Woodsworth, both supporters of Alex and his family. They each held a pistol in hand. Just behind them came Nellie and the Moon Society girls. As soon as they made it into the room in the villa where the wedding was being held, they rushed to Alex's side, checking him for injuries. Ken had heard that Alex was heading for the wedding and guessed that the situation might escalate. He had immediately called other supports and members of the Ambrose family to come and protect Alex. They had made it just in time. Even a few seconds later, Alex would have been shot dead. Ken came to Alex's side, looking him over anxiously. "Are you all right?" When Reginald saw Ken Stokes rush to Alex's side and speak to him with such concern, he was shocked. "Mr. Stokes? How do you know this boy?" The crowd began to murmur. Ken Stokes was well known, but they did not understand what the connection was between Ken and Alex. Ken rounded on Reginald with a furious look. "Do you really think you were going to get away with this?" He raised a hand and slapped Reginald hard across the face. Ken wasn't usually the kind of person to hit others, but at that moment he was livid. Reginald staggered back, one hand clutched to his face. The murmuring of the crowd raised in volume and intensity. They began to wonder if Alex was someone very important. It didn't seem likely, though. He looked so poor and insignificant. But then again, his skills had been astonishing. Reginald shook himself, trying to clear his head. "Mr. Stokes, I don't understand. Who is this boy? What is he to you?" Ken pressed his lips together. He wanted to shout out that Alex was the heir of the Ambrose family, the eldest son. The Ambrose family outranked the Drakes by far. If Reginald had any idea who he had just attacked, he would fall over himself apologizing in an instant. But Ken also knew he couldn't give Alex's identity away. As he struggled with this, a voice rang out from the entrance. "Ken Stokes, I'm sure you're not going to say anything silly. A well-dressed young man strode in, followed by an older man with thin white hair. The young man's face was slightly swollen from the beating he had received earlier in the day, but he was handsome and confident nonetheless. It was Nathan Ambrose and his bodyguard Keith. Ken knew exactly what Nathan was warning him against. Alex was still in trouble with the family and dealing with the consequences. He absolutely could not publicly identify Alex as an Ambrose at this time. There would be severe consequences. He was furious with Nathan for interfering, but knew there was nothing he could do. He clenched his hands tightly by his side. Nathan walked right up to him and slapped him across the face. "There is no need to glare at me," he said coolly as Ken massaged the bruise on his cheek. "I brought someone to help." The whispers amongst the crowd stopped dead. Everyone gazed at Nathan with awe. They couldn't believe this young man had just walked up to Ken Stokes, a famous businessman, and slapped him like a subordinate. They realized that Nathan must be someone very important. Nathan was not worried about the crowd. After dealing with Ken, he turned to Alex with a sneer. "So, you're still alive. I guess that's a good thing. You always seem to get lucky at the last second." He looked around, taking in the sight of Lindsay and Leona. He cocked his head to the side and glanced at Alex. "This isn't so lucky, though. Your girlfriend was going to have such a nice wedding. Now you've ruined it. Are you still chasing after her?" He smirked. "Let's see if she'll have you." Alex glared at Nathan, but he didn't want to argue. He knew he finally had an opportunity to make Leona remember her old life as Debbie, and he didn't want to miss it. He looked at Leona. "That jade pendant in your hand is really important. Do you remember? It was a gift. Your name is Debbie. And you can't marry David because he's not the one who really loves you. It's me." Leona shook her head slightly as if dazed by his words. Expressions flickered quickly across her face as she tried to sort out her thoughts. At some moments she looked puzzled, at others afraid. She raised her hand to reach for David, wanting his support and strength. But David was still dealing with his fear. Now that the attention had shifted to Leona, he wanted no part in the confrontation. Alex walked toward Leona slowly. His mind was full of all their experiences together. The idea of her going away to have a life and new experiences with someone else made him miserable. He held out his hand to her. "Believe me, I'm the one. Why don't you come with me?" He hoped that she could feel his sincerity. Whoever she wanted to be, Leona or Debbie, he wanted to be with her. Leona wavered, her heart beating hard in her chest. She could tell Alex was being sincere. But she couldn't shake the memories of all the times David had helped her. David saves her from the lake. David taking a beating to protect her from the attackers. She had so many feelings attached to memories of David. As far as she knew, she and Alex had no such history. Finally, she shook her head. "I'm sorry, but no. David is the one I love. I've seen today that you are very strong, Alex, but please don't force me. Please don't ruin my wedding. Alex felt like he had been poisoned. He staggered back, nearly falling to the ground. It felt so unfair. Debbie had loved him so much. Tears began to well up in his eyes, and his strength faded. He began to feel exhausted as the events of the day caught up with him. Do you really mean that? The question hurt Leona. She knew something about this whole situation was wrong, but she couldn't figure out what. She didn't understand why her heart hurt so much when she looked at him. All she could say was, I'm sorry I'm not the person you imagined. Please leave. Alex's legs went weak and he fell to the ground. Tears fell freely down his face. He felt as if his heart had drained of all feeling and become empty. All he could think was, she doesn't want me. She doesn't want me. The girls of the Moon Society rushed forward to help him up. Celine looked into his face carefully. Mr. Alex, please, say something. Nellie stood nearby, watching and quietly supporting him. Although it was a sad sight, Ken Stokes couldn't help but feel a little happy. He knew Alex must be heartbroken by the rejection. But maybe this was what needed to happen for him to finally overcome his feelings so he could apologize to the family. He stepped toward Alex and said softly, Well, she's made her feelings very clear. What do you want to do? Alex raised his gaze to look at Leona. He smiled softly and said, Okay. Congratulations. With a sigh, he turned to Nathan and said, Our grandfather sent you here to get my answer, right? Now I can say it. I'm giving up on Debbie. Episode 243, Poor Choices. By announcing that he was giving up on Debbie, it was as if Alex had apologized to the entire family. Now that he had accepted their condition, the ban against him would be lifted. Nathan was disappointed. Now that the ban was lifted, Alex would be able to return to the Ambrose family. They would be true rivals again. Nathan shook his head. Even if he didn't like Alex, he felt that this was out of character for him. Alex, what are you saying? After everything you've been through with her, you're giving up? Alex shrugged helplessly. He used his hands to push himself up, struggling to stand upright. He wanted to lay down and cry. She's found a new life. If I keep going like this, I'm just going to make her hate me. I love her. I want her to be happy. So I'll step back. Alex, what are you talking about? You're just making excuses. You made such a big deal about standing up for what was right. I'm disappointed. Let me help you, Nathan said excitedly. He was holding out hope for Alex to rediscover his stubborn streak. As long as he was busy pursuing Debbie, he would be out of Nathan's way. But Alex shook his head slowly. No. I'm giving up. It's over. I'd like the ban on me to be lifted now. Nathan swallowed nervously. Their grandfather, Lincoln Ambrose, had indeed said that Alex was welcome back to the family as soon as he gave up on Debbie. now known as Leona. But Nathan was reluctant to give up and let Alex come back so quickly. Ken, however, was elated. Just from the nervous look on Nathan's face, he could tell that Alex would be welcomed back to the Ambrose family. So he took initiative and said, "Mr. Ambrose, congratulations. Welcome back to the family." Sam Woodsworth, another Ambrose family supporter, also chimed in, offering his congratulations as well. In their words, all the young men Sam and Ken had brought to support Alex at the wedding offered their support too. Reginald Drake looked from person to person, shock and fear slowly overcoming him. He had had no idea that Alex was an important person. Now it turned out he was a member of the revered Ambrose family. The Drake family owed a great deal of their success to the Ambroses' support, but he had never met one of them in person himself. He had asked Ken for an introduction in the past, but Ken had only said that a meeting would not be worth their time. As he took in the whole scene and thought back to what Ken and Nathan had said to Alex, Reginald realized that Alex must be a very important member of the family. Quite possibly he was even the heir. He couldn't believe he had waited for years to meet Ambrose, and now had two standing right in front of him. He had mistaken one of them for a complete loser, not to mention threatened to have him killed. He walked quickly over to Alex and said, "I am honored to meet you, though it may not seem like it. Congratulations on reconciling with your family. I cannot apologize enough for my behavior before. Please deal with me as you see fit." The crowd around them gasped at this. They couldn't believe someone as powerful as Reginald Drake had switched from threatening this young man to begging him for punishment so quickly. When Alex didn't say anything, Reginald wondered if it was too late to make amends. Perhaps everyone who had threatened or insulted Alex needed to apologize. At this point, that included many of the people still watching the remnants of this disastrous wedding. He knelt quickly and gestured furiously at those standing around him to do the same. After a few moments, people began to understand his meaning, and they got down to their knees quietly, murmuring apologies. If the great Reginald Drake was scared, they knew they probably should be too. But there was one person in particular Reginald knew needed to apologize. He looked around until he spotted him. "David!" David froze on the spot. He stared back at his father with a blank look on his face. "Get over here," Reginald hissed. "There's been a great misunderstanding, and we need to make amends." David looked reluctant to humble himself. But Reginald knew it would be much better to be humble and apologize now than beg for forgiveness later. If he was given time to think about it, Alex might become even angrier and come after their family for revenge. Their entire business and reputation could be ruined. David stepped forward hesitantly, his face twitching. But then Leona reached out a hand to him, offering him help. He took her hand gratefully and knelt next to her. "I would like to apologize," he said, still shivering slightly. "I instigated the fight between you and Cliff Munson, though I am glad you were able to defeat him. I hope you can be understanding this time and forgive me. Leona watched him carefully as he made his apology. In her heart, she already considered them to be husband and wife. But she couldn't help but notice the way he only spoke of himself, and how he hadn't stepped up to protect her when Alex had approached her. She was surprised to realize she was dissatisfied with him. Looking at him felt like looking at a stranger. David's apology convinced the last few stragglers still standing to kneel and make their apologies too. Eventually, only Alex and his supporters were left standing. He looked around at the nervous crowd. Instead of a wedding, this was starting to feel like a funeral. He stepped toward David, who flinched. "Get up," he said quietly. David clambered to his feet. Leona helped him stand, but he barely noticed her support. Alex gave him a long, steady look. "Leona will be your wife. If I find out she's not happy, I will come back to settle things with you." David was pale with fright as he said, "Yes, of course." With one last nod in Leona's direction, Alex turned and walked out of the Drake family's villa. Ken lingered behind him, eyeing the crowd dubiously. He raised his voice and said, "No one outside of this room is to know what happened today. If I find out any of you been spreading stories, there will be consequences." The crowd murmured their agreement to his terms. With a gruff nod, Ken motioned to Nathan and the rest of his men that it was time to leave. Nathan grimaced. He was full of resentment and anger toward Alex. After all that trouble, he had just given up? Now the ban was lifted, and he was going to be a problem in Nathan's life again. Finally, he yelled in frustration, "Are you kidding me? What's so scary about him? Why are you all kneeling?" He shot Leona a particularly vicious glare. "And you? What have you got against him? If you weren't so heartless, he'd still be in love with you. He was ready to do anything for you." Leona stared back at him, too shocked to speak. Nathan spoke as if Alex had performed miracles in pursuit of her. But she still remembered clearly how David had helped her over and over. She thought of David as her protector. However, she had to admit that David had disappointed her today. He was still standing and trembling as if he were about to fall apart. He refused to look her in the eye. Nathan noticed this too. He strode toward David and grabbed his chin, forcing him to look at Leona. "This guy? You picked this guy? He's a joke. He didn't do anything to help you. How could you pick him over Alex?" He drew his arm back and punched David across the face. David fell limply to the ground, too frightened to fight. With a cry, Leona flew to him. But Nathan grabbed her shoulders and shook her hard. "If I had done that to Alex, he would have fought. If I had yelled at you, he would have punched me out before I'd gotten 3 words out. But the guy you chose to marry is playing dead. You gave up Alex for this." Anyone who didn't know Nathan might have thought that he was speaking out on Alex's behalf. Only those who knew the rivalry between Nathan and Alex understood that he was angry for himself. Nathan sneered at Leona coldly. You ruined everything. You have no idea how much damage you've done. He put his hand on her neck and began to squeeze. But Keith, his bodyguard, suddenly leaned forward and said in a worried tone, "Mr. Ambrose, you're being impulsive. Even if Alex says he's given up, she's clearly still important to him. There's no benefit to killing her now. Alex may come back for revenge." Nathan froze. His grip on Leona's neck didn't loosen, but it didn't tighten either. "She may be useful in the future," Keith continued. "A secret weapon. Don't throw her away just yet." Leona watched him fearfully, waiting for him to decide what to do with her. Finally, Nathan pulled his hands away. Leona backed away from him, gulping air gratefully. With reluctance, Nathan nodded. "I see your point. Fine. No matter what, I'm still going to win. I'll just have to do things a little more carefully." With a last scathing glance in Leona's direction, Nathan Ambrose turned and walked out of the villa. His old bear of a bodyguard followed him out. Episode 244, Secrets. After Nathan left, no one at the wedding was sure of what they should do next. Reginald Drake's security guards still lay on the ground, bleeding and forgotten. It was hardly the time to finish the wedding. Everyone agreed that the ceremony needed to be postponed. Reginald and his wife led the little group back to David's private rooms. Once they were there, he grabbed David and took him aside in his study. Reginald was angry with how his son had behaved during the confrontation. "How did I give birth to such a stupid coward? I shouldn't have had to force you to apologize. What's that on your trousers? Did you wet yourself?" David lowered his head in shame. He had completely lost control of himself. He was still shaking with fright. When he had caught his breath, he raised his head and said, "I don't understand. Who is Alex really, then? Why are you so scared of him?" Reginald frowned at him. "Didn't you see the respectful way Ken Stokes spoke to him? I think he's connected to the Ambrose family. He may even be very important. That's why we needed to apologize. Our family is totally reliant on the Ambrose family for support." David raised his eyebrows in disbelief. "What? How are they so important? How big are they?" Reginald sighed. "Nobody knows how big the family really is, but I've asked to meet with them in the past and have been turned down. Me? Who knows how much wealth and influence they really have?" Reginald thought again of how Alex had looked at Leona and frowned. "Don't spend too much time with Leona today. Sleep in separate beds. No funny business, you understand?" "What? Dad?" "I mean it. We don't know how serious those people are about Leona. Clearly she means something in all of this. He may have said he was giving up today, but what if Alex changes his mind and comes back for her? Do you want to gamble our whole family on his feelings? Be cautious." David felt consumed with frustration, but he knew his father was making a good point. Outside the study, Leona sat with her sister, Lindsay, and her father, Charles Marvel. Charles looked at his two daughters and sighed. "What's the matter with Alex? I thought he was just a student at your university. When did he become such a strong fighter? Leona shook her head. She was still dazed by everything that had happened at the failed wedding. She was torn between hating Alex and wanting to understand him. But above everything else, she was angry at him for the disruption he had caused. Lindsay sat by silently, nursing her grievances. Alex had shouted at him and rejected her help. She wondered if he hated her. She still had the jade pendant in her hands. When Charles spotted it, he sighed again. I told you girls that you needed to keep that hidden. Neither one of you should have been carrying it at all. How could you let it drop at the wedding? It's dangerous. Dangerous? Dad, what are you talking about? It's just a piece of jewelry. How could it be dangerous? Leona asked. A bit of fear flashed through Charles' eyes, but he quickly calmed himself down. It's just bad luck. I'm worried what will happen if too many people see it. The girls agreed to keep it hidden for the time being. Charles nodded, thanking them, but in his heart, he was still worried. That night, Nathan Ambrose returned to the Continental Hotel to eat delicious food and relax with some beautiful company. He was still angry but tried to cheer himself up. After a while, he called for 4 beautiful women to come to see him in his hotel room. They gathered around him, giggling and complimenting him. But it didn't make him happy. In a fit of rage and boredom, he ordered one girl to slap another. Although she looked frightened, the girl obeyed. But he didn't enjoy it as much as he hoped. He ordered another girl to bark like a dog. She was quicker to perform, even getting down on her knees and posing at him cutely. One of the girls still sitting next to him laughed at the sight of her colleague. Nathan elbowed her angrily. Get down there with her. She dropped to her knees and barked too. He continued coming up with silly orders and games for them to play. After a while, his ego was soothed. His gloom from the ugly turn of events that afternoon began to lift. He had asked his bodyguard, Keith, to withdraw some cash on their way to the hotel. Now he threw a bundle of bills into the air, letting it scatter across the room. You want your payment? Pick it up, he ordered the girls, and sat back to watch them scramble after the loose dollar bills. There was a stern knock at the door, which made Nathan sit up and take notice. Technically, he should have not stepped into the fight that afternoon, or brought anyone from the Ambrose family's security forces to help, since it wasn't an emergency. He thought he would get away with it since there was no way his grandfather would find out, but the knocking still put him on edge. He became a little more nervous when he saw that it was a member of the Ambrose family's security team at the door. But then the man told him that someone had come to see him, offering information. Nathan nodded. Let him in. A few minutes later, a young man in a fashionable outfit stepped nervously into the room. It was Colin Patterson, Alex's classmate from Richmond University. Colin looked around the room. The sight of the women scrambling around for money took him by surprise, and he swallowed nervously. But when he spotted Nathan, he straightened up and focused his attention on him. Nathan reclined in an armchair, watching Colin imperiously. When he saw that he had Colin's full attention, he said, "They told me you have some information that I should be interested in." Colin nodded. "I do." Nathan tilted his head, smirking. "It seems a little presumptuous of you to assume you know what I want. What do you think you have that's going to make me happy?" He had already decided that if Colin bored him, he would kick him out. But Colin looked him straight in the eye and said, "You want to hurt Alex, right? I have information you can use to do just that." Colin had watched Alex and Nathan argue at the wedding. He didn't fully understand who they were or how they were related, but it was clear they were both of high status. Colin knew this was a good opportunity to advance his interests. He hated Alex, but had little power to act against him. But Nathan seemed to have the power to do real damage. Nathan had to admit he was a little surprised. "So you were at the wedding? All right. Tell me what you've got on Alex." "We both go to Richmond University," Colin explained eagerly. "I've been watching him for a while. You'll have to judge this for yourself, but here's what happened." "Let me just remind you that my time is valuable," Nathan cut in crisply. "If this turns out to be a bunch of nonsense, there will be consequences. Talk." Colin gulped nervously. For a moment he had been feeling more confident, but now Nathan had set him on edge again. But he knew he couldn't back out now. He took a deep breath and began to tell Nathan about Alex's various adventures at Richmond. Nathan watched him impassively as he spoke, which only added to Colin's nerves. He could feel beads of sweat collecting on his forehead. But when he began to tell the story of Alex donating 1.5 million euros to the university, Nathan seemed excited. "Wait," he cried, cutting in. "How could he have that much money?" "I don't know all the details," Colin admitted, "but I heard something about a mysterious woman giving it to him." "Mysterious woman?" Nathan considered this carefully. "We need to look into this." 2 days later, Alex went to his family's private airport on the outskirts of the city, accompanied by Nellie and the girls from the Moon Society. He was taking a plane to visit the Ambrose family estate. It was his grandfather's birthday, and everyone was going to pay their respects to Lincoln Ambrose. In the past 2 days, Alex had sat the Moon Society girls and Nellie down to explain his identity and family history. When he told them he needed to go back to the family estate, they insisted on accompanying him. He figured it would be no trouble. The estate was large and could easily house extra guests. Ken Stokes was waiting for them at the airport. He greeted them and began to lead them to the helicopter set aside for Alex. But just then, a Rolls-Royce came up beside them. It parked, and out stepped Nathan and his bodyguard, Keith. "Alex," Nathan chirped, "don't tell me. After suffering so much, you wanted to go back to the old homestead to take a break, huh?" His eyes swept across Alex's group, taking in the sight of the 4 members of the Moon Society. "But things are a little different at home than in the city. It's bold of you to bring your own harem on a family visit, but I don't think our grandfather would like it." He caught sight of Nellie and raised his eyebrows. "You really do have odd tastes. The other 4 are gorgeous. But who's this, your maid? She's not really up to the standard of the others." Nellie scowled at him furiously. If it had been anyone else, she would have punished them for speaking to her that way herself. But she knew Nathan and Alex were families, and that both were of very high status. This was not her fight to start. Episode 245, Homecoming. Alex noticed right away that Nathan's insults bothered Nellie. He put a gentle hand on her shoulder and smiled at her. "Don't worry about him." Then he turned to Nathan. "I warned you to show my friends proper respect. Insult them again and you'll regret it." Nathan laughed. "Oh, I'm scared. You really have been gone a long time. I know you're a big fighter now. Nice job against that guy at the wedding, by the way. But you've forgotten how things work at home. If you attack me, the rest of the family will punish you. No fighting, remember? Really, I think you're asking for trouble by bringing these 5 girls along." But while he was talking, he felt something like a strong gust of wind behind him. Before his eyes, Alex seemed to flicker. Suddenly, he felt something strike his back. The blow sent him stumbling forward and made him dizzy. He straightened up as quickly as he could, glaring at Alex. "Whatever that was, I'll make sure our grandfather knows you hit me." Alex sneered. "I'll give you one more warning. These are my friends. Leave them alone." With that, he turned to leave. The girls followed him over to the helicopter as the propeller began to spin. Ken Stokes followed along behind them. As an important businessman and supporter of the family, he was allowed to attend Lincoln's birthday party. Nathan watched them walk away angrily. He turned to his bodyguard Keith and snapped. "I want to make sure my grandfather hears about that. Then Alex will be punished, right?" Keith shook his head. "Well, I wouldn't recommend that. He was defending his friends. Your grandfather won't take kindly to you insulting guests. Between the two of you, you're the one most likely to be punished." Nathan snarled. "I should have hit back." Keith sighed. He knew Lincoln Ambrose highly valued morality and good behavior. Nathan's impulsiveness and poor manners were going to get him in trouble one day. But he smiled. "Try not to worry too much. You've got a very good card in your hands. If you play it well, it should cause Alex some serious damage." Nathan nodded sourly. "That's true." He glanced back at the Rolls-Royce. "Are you still hiding in there? It's time to go. Come out." Colin slid out of the back seat of the car nervously. Nathan had told him to stay out of sight until Alex was gone. Nathan smiled at him. "If you do well, I'll make your family the most powerful family in DC in 3 years. I'll make sure you have everything you want for the rest of your life. But if you screw it up, I'll ruin your life. Yours and your family's. Do you understand?" Colin nodded nervously. He had spent the last 2 days in Nathan's company and was starting to understand his temperament. Rather, he understood that he didn't understand Nathan. The man's moods were unpredictable and swung wildly from one extreme to another. Colin knew his punishment or his reward, whichever he ended up with, would be just as extreme. Their helicopter soon rose in the air to follow Alex to the Ambrose estate. On Alex's helicopter, Nellie was looking at Alex with a soft smile on her face. She was very pleased with his performance. But Alex sat quietly in his seat, staring out at the scenery below them without really seeing it. Nellie nudged him. "Still thinking about Leona?" Alex shook his head. "No, not at all. But Nellie knew him better than that. You were honest with her, and she gave you an honest answer. You have nothing to regret. You worked hard. Don't be so down on yourself. Alex nodded slowly and gave her a grateful nod. Thanks, Nellie. The other women from the Moon Society sat by quietly and listened politely. They did not feel they were on good enough terms with Alex yet to ask him about something so personal. Nellie chattered on cheerfully. I never would have guessed that you were such a rich guy, but look at us in this helicopter. Your family's pretty impressive. Are you excited for the birthday party? You must be happy about finally getting to see everyone again. I'm excited, Alex said with a faint smile. I haven't seen many of them in 7 years. Not since I began my poverty training. A lot of people will be there. This'll be good. Nellie was encouraged by the sight of Alex's smile. I bet the food is going to be amazing, right? Rich families always serve good food. I'm going to completely pig out. She bared her teeth and licked her lips like a greedy cat. You're assuming you're actually going to be let into the big feast, Celeste commented snidely. Although they had agreed to get along for Alex's sake, the Moon Maidens were still not on the best terms with Nellie. Alex knew he needed to keep an eye on them all to make sure they didn't tear into one another. How do you know? Nellie sniffed. Or are you assuming that you'll all get to go but I won't? Maybe it'll be the other way around. Maybe I'm the only one Alex is going to take to the dinner, and you'll all be stuck with scraps. They bickered amicably for a little while longer. Although neither one wanted to make Alex uncomfortable, they hoped the change of subject would serve as a welcome distraction. The flight continued for another 7 hours. Then finally, they arrived at the Ambrose family estate. Although the estate was far removed from the other cities, it was still as luxurious and up-to-date as any city center. In addition to the latest technologies, it boasted a strong security and defense system. Its exact location was a complete secret. Much of the defense technology was designed to mess with ordinary scanners, making the estate difficult to detect. As soon as Alex and his group stepped off the helicopter, they were immediately driven to one of the estate guest houses. Nellie and the Moon Maidens gazed at their surroundings in wonder. We should all get to bed early tonight, Alex announced. It's going to be a big day tomorrow. You're all coming to the party. Sounds good, Nellie announced, getting up and heading directly to her room in the guest house. I'm going to sleep like the dead. I've got high expectations for my fancy room. She glanced back at the rest of the group, realizing suddenly that no one else had made a move to go to bed. She raised an eyebrow at Celeste. Didn't you hear the boss? Bedtime. We heard, Celeste said coolly. We have our own routine for getting ready for bed. Nellie rolled her eyes and shrugged. Fine, whatever. When she was gone, Celeste and the other girls turned back to Alex. Mr. Alex, you're tense. We'll give you a massage to help you sleep. Just a few days ago, Alex had felt awkward about these massages. The first time Celeste had offered him a massage, it had sounded like she was talking about something else entirely. But now Alex knew how good it felt to have the Moon Maidens work out the tension he had built up in his arms and legs. In a very short time, he had come to rely on the evening routine to help him get to sleep. He gave Celeste a grateful smile. I'd like that, thanks. Alex quickly drifted off to sleep as Celeste, Celine, Callisto, and Luna eased the tension from his muscles. But as he fell into a heavy sleep, he was disturbed by his dreams. Under his breath, he kept muttering Leona's name over and over. The Moon Girls exchanged worried expressions. Tears collected at the corners of his eyes. "Leona, Debbie, Leona, I can't leave you. Why can't you see?" The girls' faces became very sad. "He said he was giving up," Luna said quietly, "but he's still holding on to her in his heart." "It's so sad," said Celine. "I just don't know how they can be together." "But he made his choice," said Callisto. "He has to learn to be okay with it." "Let's just let him rest," Celine said with finality. "We can't solve it for him. All we can do is take care of him while he recovers." The girls nodded and worked together to pull the blankets up to cover Alex. On their way out of his room, they switched off the light and closed the door. At this time, Nathan Ambrose was visiting his parents. Now that he had finished his poverty training, he could have gone straight back to the main family mansion on the estate. But instead, he chose to visit his parents at their house on the estate. He sat across from his parents in their living room. His father, Marcus, wore a neat suit. He would have been a very handsome man, but a large mole at the corner of his mouth distorted his face somewhat. Although he could not claim to be the most good-looking person, he was still clearly refined. Next to him sat his wife, Marion. She had a lovely figure suited in purple and delicate facial features. Her neck, wrists, and fingers were covered with inexpensive jewelry. Marcus was the third son of Lincoln Ambrose, the head of the Ambrose family and Nathan's grandfather. They had very high hopes for Nathan's prospects and were concerned when they heard that Alex had been allowed to return to the estate. They had hoped that Alex's ban from the family would continue for some time. The longer he stayed away, the more Nathan would be able to establish himself and get ahead. "So, he's back already. Son, how did this happen?" Marcus asked. "When we spoke before, you made it sound like he wouldn't be able to return for some time." Nathan shifted in his seat uncomfortably. He was upset about it too, but he didn't want to show that too openly. "So what? He's just back a little sooner than expected. It's not a big deal. I'm still in a good spot." Marcus gave him a stern look. "Don't rest on your laurels. Your grandfather liked him better than you when you two were small. You have the chance to gain a more competitive edge here. Don't ruin it." Nathan had not seen his family for the entire 7 years of his poverty training. This meeting was only his second time seeing his father since his return. As a child, Nathan had had an aggressive, hard-working attitude. He had a strong sense of self-respect and understood the value of working hard now to reap the rewards later. Marcus had always admired this about him. But now that they were reunited, he felt at times that his son's character had changed. Now, Nathan gave him a cold look. "I don't need you to lecture me about this." Nathan's poverty training had indeed changed him. During his 7 years away, he experienced a great deal of cruelty. Many people had looked down on him, and he had been helpless to defend himself from their attacks. He was proud of himself for overcoming those challenging times, but he felt he had done it entirely alone. He was a survivor. What kind of advice could his father give him? He hadn't been there to help. He had no idea what Nathan had been through.
Thank you for listening to Crown TV. Please don't forget to subscribe, share and turn on the notification button.